Welcome to another episode of the Heat Check show, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I am John Devine. This is Anthony Chang, and we are here the day after the season is officially open for the Heat. That's the good news. Other good news is Pat Riley had the court named in his honor. That's great. 30 years of service and 30 years of unprecedented heights. That's the other good news. The bad news is the actual game itself, which didn't quite go exactly as planned.
No.
116-97. We will break that down. We will break down what we think this means for the season, whether this is an overreaction or whether this is a harbinger of things to come. First things first, I guess the fact that they got blown out. What was most disturbing and what was most out of character you hope for the season?
I mean, where do I start? They didn't play well at all. Like there wasn't. I don't know if there's one area where I'm like, oh, that was encouraging. The first half, I guess, was a little encouraging, but they were still down by 4 points at halftime. The offense, you could tell there was kind of some carryover from the preseason. There was a lot of ball movement, getting a lot of good shots at the rim, getting to the free throw line. I think they went to the free throw line around 20 times in the first half, pushing the pace a little bit. But again, they still were down 4 points at halftime. But it was a tight game back and forth. But the third quarter was a disaster on both ends of the court. The Heat kind of reverted back to their old ways on offense, which I think, again, it's one game, and this is a new offense, so it's going to take some time. But that was the most concerning thing because you wanted to see would those encouraging preseason trends carry over when the real games start, or would they revert back to their old ways because that's who they've been. And they missed some shots against a really, really good Magic defense, and they kind of went back to their old ways. They got stagnant, didn't get to the rim, didn't get to the free throw line, were taking contested shots, and just like last season, their bad offense kind of split over to their defense, where then the Magic were getting rebounds and running and scoring in transition, hunting mismatches in transition when guys were cross-matched. Just really, really bad basketball. To start the second half after Pat Riley's ceremony. And then you talk about Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, 12 points combined between the two of them. Obviously not going to cut it really on any night. So just a lot of bad things to start the season. It's one game, like you said, but there wasn't much good that happened in this one.
I think one of the things we always talk about when we go back to last season are they had those scoring droughts. They would have those 3, 6, 7-minute stretches but they couldn't put anything in. Yeah. And it seemed like that was the end of the first half and early in the second, and that's when it got out of hand. Do you think it's something as easy as shot selection, not getting to the rim? Just betraying whatever principles it looked like or emphasis that they had in the preseason that doesn't seem to, or maybe they just fall back into patterns they're most comfortable with?
Yeah.
Or is it just a one-game aberration?
To be honest, I mean, I had my questions about the offense going into the season because, again, it's pretty much the same team as last year. Last 2 years, where the core is the same, Tyler, Bam, and Jimmy, and they've been one of the bottom 10 offenses the last 2 years. To think this year, just because they made these tweaks, they're all of a sudden going to be a top 10 offense, it's not realistic, right? And, I mean, honestly, just being average on offense would be a step forward for this team. Let's get to 15th instead of 24th. Right? But that first game, again, it's one game, but it kind of shows you who they've been for the last 2 years. And that is concerning. It's like, can they get away from that? Through one game, they couldn't. They kind of went back to what they've been the last few years where they just were one of the league's worst offensive teams. And that's the bottom line. The numbers scream that out. They have been a bad offense for the last 2 years, and the coaching staff knows it. The players know it. That's why they made some changes. But you are who you are, right? You're not going to turn a guy into all of a sudden, James Harden, peak James Harden. Like, you have the players you have. Jimmy's 35. He's getting older. Bam is kind of, he's incorporating a 3-point shot, but he's kind of a developed offensive player. You know where you're going to get other than the new, added more threes. Tyler Hero is who he is. Terry Rozier adds something, but there is a little bit of an overlap with him and Tyler, and you kind of saw them struggle to find their own spots within the offense, whether it was Bam or Jimmy not getting the shots they wanted. Tyler got some shots in the first half, and the second half he didn't get much. So that's going to be a work in progress. But again, I guess the biggest thing is when Jimmy and Bam score 12 points combined, you're not going to win many games, if any games, right? Though it sounds simple, but those two guys need to be better. I'm looking at the box score right now. Jimmy and Bam combined for 12 points. Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero combined for 56 points, 56 to 12. So their top two were much better than the Heat's top two. And really, I think that was the biggest difference in the game.
It's funny you should mention Paolo and one of the Wagner brothers. It's one of those things where Orlando has been in purgatory for so long that people kind of overlook what the deal is. And if we look at this team, they are huge, they are long,
athletic.
Their defense is ridiculous. They're athletic. They have a similar problem, which is shooting. But they get out and run, and their defense gives them some offense where they can convert some buckets. Part of it needs to be credit for the fact that this was probably a bad matchup for them anyway, as they're trying to find their footing. The Heat's trying to find their footing.
Yeah, no, it is a bad matchup. Although the Heat did beat them 3 out of 4 times last year. The Magic won the division, but the Heat won 3 out of 4. But yeah, it is a bad matchup. Length, athleticism seems to always get the Heat because the Heat are a smaller team. They usually, they're trying to push the pace now, but they usually like to play slow. You saw the Magic take advantage of the Heat's misses and run and try to, again, Magic don't have the best offense. They might have the best defense in the NBA, but they don't have the best offense. So just like the Heat, they're trying to find easy baskets in transition. And the Magic's defense kind of fueled that last night. It's going to fuel it for most of the season. Their best offense is going to be off of misses and running, right? And we saw that in that third quarter when they blew the game open against Miami. It's a bad matchup, but it is, I guess, something to at least take stock of saying the Heat might not be the best team in the state. And when is the last time we could say that, right?
Dwight
maybe
Howard,
last year.
Shaq.
Yeah, it's been a while, right? It's been a while since we could say that. And again, it's one game, but the fact that they won the division last year and they just beat the Heat by 19 points, really it should have been even more lopsided, but in garbage time, he kind of cut into that lead. Yeah, I don't know if the Heat have the best team in the state anymore. They might not even have the best player in the state, if you what think about Paolo did. So, again, that's not the biggest point of, the biggest takeaway from this game, but it is something to at least monitor, right? Because it's been a while since we could say the Magic are better than the Heat, like definitively.
And you know what? And I always laugh because, now that young legs no longer apply to anything that I do anymore. But when you have young legs, you run, you jump, you get out, you run. They're outside of like signing KCP. Orlando's full of guys who can just run and jump like a bunch of deer. And then as you get older, more experience, you stop running and jumping as much because you know the game and you get out selected. So Jimmy can fill the break. These guys can. But now they know the game enough. They're like, okay, we'll get it. We'll ease our way in. We've got 24 seconds. The kids are just going out there and saying, let's see what I can do on a highlight reel. Let's see if I can show up on SportsCenter. And if you are not up to matching that energy, forget everything else. Just to guard them running, this is what could happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And the thing is with the Heat, and they've had this issue now for a couple of years. They have so many either or guys, right? Where like you put Duncan Robinson, he's a great shooter, helps the offense. But then the Magic are hunting him on the other end. Same thing with Tyler Hero. If you have Duncan, Tyler Hero, and Terry Rozier in the court together, now they have 3 people they could pick on. Or Nikola Jovic. Like, there's so many either-or guys. There aren't a lot of guys that the Heat are playing that are great two-way players. Bam and Jimmy, great two-way players. Who else is a great two-way player in the rotation? I don't know if there is one, right?
And the two-way players are limited. And when I say limited, I mean that, okay, so if you do that, yes, Bam working on threes this year. Right. Okay, but your three-point shooting may suffer on a two-way scale. So It's like, okay, so they can design defenses accordingly. It's not like you have somebody all the way around. And yes, and let's be honest, it's rare in the NBA overall. So it's not just a Heat problem. No. There are other teams and other people who do that. But there are definite holes even in our two-way players that Spo has to match to make these pieces fit.
Yeah. And Jimmy, to me, we have to see how this goes over the next few weeks, first few months. But last year there was signs of him obviously getting older. He's turned 35 last month. He wasn't finishing as well around the rim. Obviously, he wasn't as healthy last year. The numbers were down across the board. The thinking was this year, he'd be in a better place. Obviously, he had some off-court things he was dealing with last year. But that first game was not encouraging, right? I mean, to finish 1 of 6 in the paint and 1 of 4 at the rim, that is the first thing to go for a guy like Jimmy when your game starts to decline a little. But again, I'm not ready to say that yet. But if you're coming off of one game and you're thinking bounce back season for Jimmy, we're going to get the Jimmy of 2 years ago. That first game obviously is something to worry about, right? It's a bad matchup, yes, but the Jimmy of 2 years ago didn't care about matchups. He was getting 25, 30 whenever he wanted to. So that is probably one of the most concerning things from the opener.
And finishing at the rim, it's like, okay, if you came in the league with a 38, 40-inch vertical, and now you're 35, and you've lost like 3 or 4 inches off that vertical, which is human nature, happens. All of a sudden, those finishes aren't quite the same, even at 6'6", 6'8". You're facing a team where everybody's 6'8", 6'9", 6'10". All of a sudden, someone's in your way where you could power through, where you're not powering through quite the same. That's the part about the bad matchup. If this was a team that was small like they are, and he powers through, it's probably not as difficult to get your shot off.
Right.
But now you face the flipping forest of these guys who are just sitting there and your hands are up, you can't see a thing.
Yeah.
I hope, and then sometimes some people it just takes a minute to get in the groove. Sure. And if you're not in the groove yet, and we always talk about preseason, I think everybody played in the preseason. It was great. You just threw wave after wave after wave of people, and now it's like, okay, your stars are going to play 30, 35 plus minutes. That's still a different kind of shape to get under. You still have to get your legs for that.
For sure. But again, Orlando had to deal with the same thing, right? And
yes.
I know some fans will say the halftime ceremony was too long. It was 30 minutes. The Heat came off flat after the halftime ceremony. Eric Spoelstra had to sit there for the entire thing, which was a great moment. But again, the Magic had to deal with the same thing, right? Yeah, I know the Magic coaches weren't out there for the Power moment, but I just the narrative of like we have to just wait and see. I get it, right? There have been changes. Terry Rozier now, like they didn't really play much with this group because of all the injuries, and there's a new offensive plan now. Nikola Jovic is a full-time starter now. Like there are some little tweaks, but we kind of know what this core is at this point, right? And like the whole continuous narrative of like let's just wait and see. It's just one game. I get it, but at what point do we say this is who they are now? They're not a bad team. They're not a great team. They are a playoff team in the East that's fighting to avoid the play-in, right? That is after the first game, you still have that concern because, I mean, there was not much good that happened in that first game. So I want to talk about the other end real quick too, because we talked a lot about the offense. Defensively, we saw in the preseason, and even in the first few years of the Jimmy Butler, last couple years of the Jimmy Butler experience, forcing turnovers is a big part of this team's formula. Because again, like we talked about, it helps. That's the best offense for this Heat team because they struggle in the half court. In the preseason, they got 15 steals in each game, which was a huge thing. They had the highest opponent turnover percentage in the preseason, just the preseason, but you kind of saw them getting back to that part of their game. Against the Magic, I think in that third quarter, which was the bad quarter, they forced 2 turnovers only. Their deflections were down from last year's season average. Opponent turnovers were down from last year's season average. They weren't, and Eric Spoelstra said after the game, the activity just wasn't there. The effort wasn't there on the defensive end. And yes, we talk about the offense, and they hope to be better on offense, but really it starts on the defensive end, not in like forcing misses, but in creating turnovers and being able to fuel other parts of their game with those turnovers that they force. So that wasn't even there last night.
Didn't they have a similar start defensively last year like that? It seemed like, or was it just a stretch early in the season?
No, I think if I can recall, I feel like the last 2 years they've had this start of like being mediocre on defense, and then by the end of the year, like Eric Spoelstra is just so good, and Bam is so good on defense that they figure out a way through like playing record amounts of zone and press, full court press to get into the top 10 somehow by the end of the season. So I don't necessarily worry about the defense as much, but it's like we talked about. They're playing a lot of players that aren't plus defenders. So
Right.
at some point, when you lose a Caleb Martin, when you lose a Gabe Vincent, when you lose a Max Strus, who was not a bad defender, you're gonna see the consequence of that. You know, like they don't have Caleb Martin anymore. He was one of their best perimeter defenders. So, you know, at what point do you see the drop off? Again, I know I've said this 1,000 times. It's one game, but there were a lot of concerning signs last night.
Okay, so let's put it this way. Just to remind everybody, it's one game. It's one game. And if you're in New York right now, after seeing that Celtics Knicks game, for that game, you're probably saying the same thing. How much should we overreact after one game? You know what? I was listening. I was driving around this morning. Heard someone on talk radio. Is this really game 83 of last season? Or is this the first game of the 2024-25 season? So I have to give credit that it was over there.
Yeah.
I am not smart enough to do that on my own. Wish I was. Actually, well, I'm not. So, but is this just more of the same? Or because we talk about this team running it back, we're going to run into the same issues, the same problems all the way through? Or can Spo unlock something that's with this team?
Well, they were healthy last night, so that's a big difference. Right?
There you go.
They weren't healthy at all, really at all, maybe at any point last season. So that was a change. So that's new. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's time to panic yet. Although I do sound concerned, right? I think it's fair to be concerned because again, you saw a lot of the same issues you've seen off the last few years. But when I talk to guys in the preseason, even when things were going well, when I talk to the guys in the new starting lineup, I'm like, what do you think? How's the process going of just getting chemistry and building, you know, continuity with you guys? You haven't played together ever before this season. And they said, look, we have confidence it's going to work, but we know there's going to be bumps along the way. Like it's not going to happen immediately. And we've seen it with teams, whether it was Milwaukee last year with Giannis and Dame. I mean, there's other teams that it takes a little bit to find an identity on both ends when you're using a new lineup. So there is that, but again, the three best players on the team, Tyler Hero, Bam, and Jimmy, have played together now for 6 years. This is their 6th season together. So I think they do deserve a little bit of, you know, a month, 2 months to kind of see where they're at after then. But yeah, I think it's fair to be concerned because again, it's not like last season they're coming off being the 3 seed and getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Like last season was disappointing, even the season before. I know they went to the finals, but that regular season was not fun to go through. They almost didn't make the playoffs. They had to win against the Bulls in the last minute in that play-in game just to get into the playoffs and then eventually go on that run. But that was a shaky season too. So I think it's fair to be concerned because of the struggles we've seen the last couple of years with this group.
Okay, so let's do this as the Heat fans are panicking who are watching this anyway. We're talking about matchups. What types of teams do you think are going to give the Heat trouble while they're trying to figure it out? So, like we just said, this was not the ideal matchup for them to get started and ramp their way up. So, we're saying athletic, tall teams could pose a problem, clearly.
Yeah.
But that being said, the Magic's offense, you know, it's get out and run.
Right.
Okay, so that shouldn't have been a problem. So they had a chance. If you looked at it on paper going in, it's like, okay, we know they're big, but we can probably get some turnovers from these guys. Maybe maybe the Heat can turn their defense into offense. Didn't happen. But stylistically, who is tailor-made for the Heat style of play? Who should give them problems as we're going in? Because, you know, as much as we all love the NBA, like Indiana gets out and runs like a track.
Yeah.
But if we bring Sacramento in and we go, okay, and then all of a sudden Sacramento gives us a surprise and blows them out by 20, we don't understand why. But we know going in, this is not a good matchup for them. This is what they have to do. So what kind of teams work well and what kind of teams really will give them a hard time going in?
Boston would give them a hard time.
Sure. Gee, thanks for going on a limb there. But yes. 63s a game and hitting 50% of them.
Yeah, and having 5 guys on the court who could defend.
Yes.
It's like unbelievable. I mean, it's like you talk about two-way players, right? I mean, Boston, they have 5 guys who could shoot and make threes at a really high clip, and also 5 guys who could defend at a high level.
Derek White is like, where does he rank on that team? And you can't tell me that a lot of teams, and you know, especially the Heat have pulled gems out of nowhere. But
yeah,
how would Derek White?
Derek White is one of the most important players on that team.
Exactly.
It's great. I think just to put it like in just the trait of a team that gives the Heat issues is length, size, because Bam and Jimmy, they're really good at finding mismatches. That's kind of their game. Get the switch, go to work, take advantage. Orlando, there aren't many of those spots. There aren't any of those spots really for the Heat, for Jimmy and Bam to kind of mismatch hunt like the Magic were doing with Nikola Jovic, Tyler Hero in transition, Duncan Robinson. The Magic don't have that. And if the opponent, the opposing team doesn't have those spots for Jimmy and Bam to take advantage of, you kind of saw what happens, right, last night, where they struggle to find their shots. They aren't able to get great shots around the rim. They aren't able to get those post-ups where they take advantage of a weaker defender or a smaller defender. Okay, look at the Knicks.
They don't have smaller defenders.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's why it's a bad matchup.
6'5",
yeah, that's a bad matchup. I look at the Knicks even. Like the Knicks, yes, is Karl-Anthony Towns a great defender? No, but he has size. You have OG. You have Mikal Bridges. You have Josh Hart. Like those are 3 really good defenders who could. Jimmy Butler calls for the switch on any of them. It's not going to be easy. So that's another tough matchup. I know they're working through their things right now.
Right.
And we're going to see that matchup next week on Wednesday, which we'll talk about it the next day in next week's episode. But that is not a great matchup for the Heat either at this point because of the depth they have as far as elite perimeter defenders. So, I would say those teams that have plus defenders at 4, sometimes 5 spots on the court, that's when it's a really bad matchup for the Heat, especially if they have size as well.
It's funny you should mention that because I saw the Knicks Celtics game, and I saw Karl-Anthony Towns on there because I was curious because look, it's in the East.
Yeah.
Karl-Anthony Towns was being covered by who? Do you remember who?
Yeah, it was a smaller defender. I forgot who it was. It was
Drew Holiday.
Yeah. They were taking advantage of Towns on both ends of the court.
Right, and it was like they just let him sit out there because they assumed he was just going to go shoot threes, and that was it. And it was like it seemed crazy to me.
Right.
Granted, they were getting blown out, but it was amazing to me that they could get away with that consistently.
Yeah.
And it's just like my hope is always as Bam evolves and adds the 3-point shot to his game, that if they think they can put a Drew Holiday on him, they should go to work immediately. And, it's one of those things that evolves. You really hope offensively that as they're hunting mismatches, that everybody's aware of it. Because, he can't give himself the ball unless he rebounds and brings it down and backs him down. And that went out in the 90s. So it's just, I am worried because I was looking at the Knicks and I'm like, they have a feeling out process because they have this guy in.
Yeah. And Bridges, too. Bridges is new.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, Bridges isn't exactly the 3-point marksman that, like, Dante DiVincenzo was.
Yeah.
So, okay, how do you take advantage of it? So your big guy, who's Karl-Anthony Towns, shoots threes, but who's
that?
The new thing, I saw the Celtics, all 5 guys were on the outside of the 3-point line on offense. And it's like, okay, who's cutting? They were like, we don't give a crap who's cutting. We're just going to go there and shoot. Yeah, and it was like, nobody's cutting, nobody's in the block, nobody. Didn't matter.
My thing is like
special.
When I was watching the Boston New York game and I see on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, people are like, oh, this is so bad for basketball. 63s. This is not fun to watch. Not every team can do that. Like it takes a very unique roster to be able to do that because if the Heat try to do that, for instance, like
they can shoot.
It's not going to work. Yeah, they're going to make 15 of them. It's not going to be a good plan to a good formula for success. So, yeah, I get it. People don't love watching 63s, but again, it takes a very unique team. Boston is probably one of the best, or is one of the best offenses in NBA history. That's what it takes. So, I don't really get like the whole like this is going to ruin the league. Not every team can do that. But to your point, like the Heat are trying to play five out now with Bam
Right.
shooting more threes. And it was interesting because last night, when you have five guys in the perimeter, one of the downsides of that is there's nobody under the basket to get the rebound, right? And rebounding was an issue last night on both ends. The Magic finished with how many offensive rebounds? 18 offensive rebounds. Again, that's some of that size, but that kept them in the while the Heat when he were playing well in the first half, getting to the free throw line. Those second chance points kept Orlando in the game, and then they eventually blew it open in the second half. So it's one game. It's a bad, maybe they beat Charlotte by 40 on Saturday. They should beat Charlotte on Saturday, even though Charlotte beat Houston to start the season. But there wasn't. I don't know. What would you point to that happened that was good, other than Pat Riley's ceremony in the opener? I don't know. I really
think getting to the rim early was a good sign for them.
Yeah.
And it's, we were talking about everybody standing out there shooting threes is the evolution. I blame Mike D'Antoni for all this. That's okay. But coming back, it's like, all right, you know what? The Heat always likes to zig when other people zag. What they may need to rely on is getting to the lane and getting to the line. They may have to do it that way for them. Because just because Boston can do that doesn't mean that these guys, this roster.
You play to your personnel, right?
Right.
And I mean, even last night, Orlando took 15 more threes than the Heat. He took 34 threes, which isn't a lot in today's world. I mean, that's below average. Some of that was Orlando's defense, but yeah, I think the hope was the Heat would take. I'm sure the Heat wanted to take more threes than that. 34 is a low number, and they only make 11. Orlando makes 18. That's a difference of 21 points right there. So really, I mean, Magic won the second chance point, had more second chance points. They won from the 3-point line. They outscored them in the paint. The only advantage he had was at the free throw line. And yeah, that's not a recipe for success for the Heat. They have to at least shoot the ball respectably from three, probably take more threes, and also sustain, like you said, the rim attempts they had in the first half. Because the first half there were some good signs, but the question is now with this quote unquote new offense, can they sustain it over a large sample over multiple games? Because again, that's not who they've been the last few years.
Because you're talking, okay, so you're saying getting to the line, and like I said, this whole thing's going in cycles. Getting to the line for them means maybe the pace slows a little bit, but it also means the potential for foul trouble.
Yeah.
If you put them in if you put opponents in
the
foul
bonus,
trouble,
yeah,
you get the bonus, but you also force their rotations to be different.
Right.
When you force the rotations to be different, then maybe you can open it up more because guess what? Like a Paolo Banchero is not on there destroying you on both sides of the floor.
Yeah.
Or, Jalen Suggs. So that is something where they go, maybe this part is antiquated. You don't see as much foul trouble when people are jacking up 63s again. You just don't, unless it's on rebounds or loose balls.
Loose balls, yeah. And I mean, to your point, to start the game against Orlando, Jalen Suggs picked up his third foul like 5 or 6 minutes into the game. Mm-hmm. That's good for the Heat. Jalen Suggs is a good player, one of the best perimeter defenders. Can make an open three. He only played how many minutes in the first half? I think like 5. He basically went out midway through the first quarter, didn't come back to the third quarter. He really couldn't take advantage. They were down by 4 at halftime, but they technically did that. They got Orlando in foul trouble. They were in the bonus early in that first quarter. That's one of the reasons they had all those free throws in the first half. But then Orlando kind of clogged the paint, started the third quarter when he started missing threes, and it went downhill from there. So, yeah, a lot of things to clean up. I guess my question to you, JD, before we wrap this up is next 3 games before they go to Mexico City the end of next week, before we speak again, at Charlotte, and then they host Detroit, and then host the Knicks. What do you think they do over these next 3 games?
I think it doesn't matter, and we know absolutely nothing. Because I think we have to watch at the style of play. I think the results, obviously, if your name is Eric Spoelstra or Pat Riley, results matter all the time.
Right. The process matters more.
Yes, the process is going to matter more. It is, how are they going to find out who they are on offense and defense? Because, okay, Detroit is still rebuilding. Charlotte's rebuilding. there are talented pieces
Right.
for both places, so you can see what you have to deal with. Look, both of those guys have guards all over the place that can run around and do crazy things. That's great for the Heat to figure out what they need to do. We know, Celtics game notwithstanding, the Knicks are a very talented team. Yeah. So you're going to run into those. So you can go 2-1 and still look like garbage, or you can go 1-2 and you feel better about how this season's going to go.
That's because, a good point.
You know, maybe something happened at the end, or maybe there was foul trouble. But I think it's still process for them. You know, maybe Eric Spoelstra would be like, I can't believe that guy just said that. But for me, it's how are they integrating these? How are they integrating their concepts going forward? Do they have more energy on defense? Are they getting loose balls? Are they getting tips? Are they clogging those lanes better? Or are people just taking them one-on-one and getting to the hole and finding the open man, shooting an open three, or are they going to the rim?
Yeah.
I think that's what matters when we come back a week from now to go, okay, they're tightening the screws up. They're getting better to what they want to do. Now let's see if what they want to do is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think, like to your point, I don't think a 92-91 win over Charlotte on Saturday is going to really make Heat fans happy, you know, right. Even though it's a win, right? Like, you want to see the process. You want to see the offense, them continue to kind of trend in the right direction in those areas they've been emphasizing, and then the defense get back to who they've been, which is, even though they haven't had the best defensive personnel, they've been a top 10 defense. Last year, they were a top 5 defense. So they have it. I mean, they have the coaching. They have the top-end defensive players, you know, a couple, 2 or 3 of them that can change a game defensively and take over a game defensively. So they have it there. But again, it's about doing it consistently over multiple games. That has been the Heat's biggest issue in the last 2 regular seasons. So,
you know what? Jimmy and Bam have to grab the game, but have to grab.
Yeah, they have to be. Yeah, they have to be more aggressive. They can't score 13 points and, you know, Bam took 10 free throws, but Jimmy was 1 of 8. I think he had the as far as usage rate, I think Jaime Jaquez, Tyler Hero, Nikola Jovic, and Tyler Hero all had a higher usage rate, which is basically an estimate of like the number of possessions you were using in a game. That can't happen. Jimmy or Bam need to have the highest usage rate on the team for this team to be at its best. It can't be 4 players and then Bam and Jimmy. That's just not going to work. And we've seen that now for years. So that's step number 1. Jimmy and Bam have to be a bigger part of the offense. And that's on them, right? That's on them too. It's not just on like coaching staff or guys around them. It's on them to be more aggressive. And I think they know that.
I agree. So I look forward to seeing how the next week plays out when we come back here to see what we're dealing with. So instead of overreacting 1 game, we'll overreact to 4. And here's hoping everything gets straightened out. We have better news for you. But until next week, this is Anthony Chang. I'm John Devine. We look forward to the next episode of the Heat Check.